The lesson.
Oh yeah.
Quro and I kept working on like writing songs, and we then connected with GT because obviously I knew GT through the Point Blank connection, and also just through meeting him in where we used to collaborate was at GT's house, because GT used to live with Tom Abbott in North Adelaide. So we would always be hanging out with GT playing Nintendo or whatever, you know what I mean? Anyway, hooked up with GT, said, look, you know, we're doing some stuff, and GT sort of loosely agreed to help us try and produce some material. And then the Death Wish cast Mad as a Hatter EP came out, and GT heard it, and he was like, wow, we need to put out some material, right? I think it was around that time. Or we'd already started working on a tape, I can't remember. I think when the record came out, Mad as a Hatter, it was a bit of a motivation for GT. I think that came out 92, or it might have been a bit later. The years are a bit hazy for me, but in 92, Quro, GT and myself had started working on making a tape, basically to release a tape, and we had also been we ended up going up to a Vapors benefit in Sydney and performing. It was meant to be Mama's Funk, Finger Licking Good. Well, actually, originally it was Death Wish cast, Funky Nomads, I think Urban Poets, Mama's Funksticles, or Mama's Funk as they were called. They were meant to perform at it, but I don't think they turned up. There was a few other groups. And then, basically Blaze put us on the bill for it. So Finger Licking Good went up to Sydney and performed in King's Cross. And it was great. You know, that was where we made a connection with Death Wish cast. And I think Intense Quality were meant to play at that as well. I'm not sure. But I had already connected with, Parrish and I think we'd already connected with Reason from Intense Quality, because I literally met Reason in Adelaide. It was one day, we were at Central Station when it was in Gaze Arcade, and somehow Reason just sort of, we started talking. He was there, and he was like, oh, let me get your name and your number and stuff like that. And he started telling me about the Melbourne scene, because I didn't know a lot about the Melbourne scene apart from what I read in Vapors, or I think maybe Hype magazine at the time. But he was in a group, I think he just started the group Intense Quality, but he was in a group called NME at the time. And so at that point, that was where Reason and I then started having a connection. And so there was, basically there was a good connection, I suppose, between, the Melbourne scene at the time through Reason. He'd send me a few letters, tell me what was happening in Melbourne and stuff, and stayed in contact with him. And by the time we'd gotten up to Sydney, we did that Vapors gig. Chrissy from Melbourne was up there. I might have met her already by then, but anyway, she was up there, and we bonded with her and made good connection with her, and she helped keep us up to date as well with what was happening in Melbourne and stuff. And because you got to remember, this is pre-internet days, right? No internet. So the way people connected, the way that information transferred for the hip hop scene in Australia was ultimately through Hype magazine or through, I think, Vapors. I don't even think Vapors came out after 91 or something, right? So it was then through sending each other tapes and stuff, or phoning each other, or going over and seeing each other. You know what I mean? Like Reason had come over here, and then Quro and I would go over to Melbourne. We did a few gigs in Melbourne with Intense Quality and Death Wish cast in Melbourne in around 92, 93. And we started developing this connection, I suppose, with Death Wish cast after the Vapors gig. And there was this idea that, we would, I don't know, we just kept in contact. And for me, this is kind of pre-Culture of Kings. For me, this is where the real bond between the states, it started with that. It started with the bond of Death Wish cast, Intense Quality, Finger Licking Good, and then obviously homebrewed here in Adelaide, which was Muskrat and Drew Pade and that, like they were also kind of real involved in the scene as well. Bit younger than Quro and myself, they were coming up. They were totally involved with the scene. In fact, I got a photo here with the group of us standing there just out the front of the Astor. Basically, I was going to say, it was kind of like a hot pot of activity for us, for myself and Quro, and also for Matt Pearce, who was heavily involved in promoting hip hop through the Core magazine at the time here in Adelaide. We had sort of spearheaded this promotion of Australian hip hop here in Adelaide, right? So because Matt Pearce, aka Gen 1, had then become the editor of the Core magazine, which was the precursor to Rip It Up's little, what did they have? Onion?
Yeah.
This is before Onion existed.
Yeah.
There was Rip It Up that looked after all of the, I guess, the alternative music industry. I say alternative, but it was wide, spectrum was broad. The Core magazine was the backbone of club culture in Adelaide, and when Gen 1, or Matt, became the editor of it, because he was so heavily interested in hip-hop and loved hip-hop, and he was part of the club hip-hop environment in Adelaide in the late 80s, he had he was a bit of a punk before that, I believe, but he was really into it. He helped give Australian hip-hop a voice in Core magazine, and we would have a double-page spread on Australian hip-hop. So he would interview Death Wish Cast and urban poets, and there was just a lot. There was a lot going on from the media perspective as well here in Adelaide that helped build the culture in Adelaide. And we had that vehicle here, and then Gen 1, myself, and Quro, around 93, what we wanted to do is we wanted to replicate Hypnotical Gases, which was the Vapors benefit gig in Sydney that we had played at. So we wanted to do an event here in Adelaide that brought a couple of hip hop crews, or one hip hop crew from each state. It was called Voices from the Underground, and we had Death Wish Cast, we had Mama's Funk, we had Finger Lickin' Good, we had Urban Poets. And Intense Quality, the first one. So the first one we had just down Hindley Street, from what used to be the Greater Union Cinemas on the North Terrace side, I guess, of the street. And the cinemas had stopped functioning at that time. Not where they moved down near Big Ticket, sort of down near what's it called, Rocket Bar and all that sort of stuff. There was cinemas further up, near, I think, on the corner where KFC is now. I think that's where it was. And they called it the Zoo or something for a little while. So they had this big back room, this big stage, and we put on Voices from the Underground Part 1 there. And we had all these groups come to Adelaide. Prior to that, Quro and I had already been to Sydney a few times. We recorded with Death Wish Cast for their album. So I've got a photo here of us in the studio at, I think, Random Records or something like that. So we'd been up to Sydney a couple of times. I think we'd done a couple of, maybe one or two more gigs up there. We had been up to Sydney we met Ike, Intense Quality, Reason and Murmur up in Sydney for the AUST Down Under Coming Up video shoot. So we went up there for that day. That was amazing. Great day, big night. I think we spent a few days or a week up there in Sydney just hanging out with Death Wish Cast and Intense Quality, and it was a lot of fun. But us doing something like Voices from the Underground really helped connect Adelaide to what was going on with Sydney and Melbourne, and also establishing Adelaide as, hey, there's a good hip-hop scene in Adelaide too. Even though it was a little bit fractured. There was the music scene, and then the graffiti scene was a little bit different. They was, they weren't kind of together, perhaps, like, they were later.
the lesson.
927. Oh, yeah.